μαστιγού. Ουέ! Μη πείσεις με εκτός ομιλής.
Welcome to Pylos, traveler. This area, along with the nearby island of Sphacteria, were important battlegrounds during the Peloponnesian War. I always find it a shame that such lovely-looking places were exposed to so much violence. It's difficult to take pleasure in relaxing on the sand, knowing how stained it is with blood. The Peloponnesian War was a great conflict between rivals Sparta and Athens. It lasted many years and cost a great number of lives on both sides. The battles of Pylos and Sphacteria occurred almost one after the other, and culminated with one of the most surprising outcomes in the entire war. But I will not spoil it for you. You'll have to experience it on your own. I'll wait for you at the end of the tour.
Since 431 BCE, the Peloponnesian War had been raging between Athens, Sparta, and their allies, with neither side gaining much ground. But in 425 BCE, an Athenian general named Demosthenes changed that. After a storm forced his fleet to stop in Pylos, Demosthenes realized a military presence in the area would give them an advantage against Sparta. Unfortunately, the fleet strategists did not believe him, and left Demosthenes in Pylos with 5 triremes and 1,000 men. The Spartans, meanwhile, were too busy celebrating a religious festival to notice the enemy on their doorstep. Once Sparta discovered the Athenian presence on Pylos, the Spartan king Aegeus mustered his troops and fleet. Sparta then descended on Demosthenes' outpost, attacking from both the sea and the mainland. The Athenian general had to mount a hasty defense. He pulled his boats back to the foot of the ramparts and fixed them in place with stakes, providing extra cover. Then, going against all the established rules of battle, he descended with his hoplites to fight on the rocky shore, where he believed the Spartans would disembark. His gamble paid off, and the Spartans did indeed attempt to land at this location, though Demosthenes' forces made them hesitate. One of the Spartan leaders, Brasidas, decided to make the first move by ramming the rocks with his boat, exclaiming, "It's only a few planks." He paid for his actions when his shield slipped into the sea after descending from his boat, leaving him open to many blows. The battle raged on into the night and continued to the next day, remaining locked in a stalemate. However, on the evening of the second day, Athenian reinforcements arrived. The sudden arrival of the Athenian fleet stacked the odds in Athens' favor. The fleet decided to hold off their attack until the next day, when they swarmed the Spartan ships. They successfully captured 5 enemy ships and damaged many others, cutting off access to the nearby island of Sphacteria. Then, to add insult to injury, the Athenians raised a stake hung with weapons they'd captured from the Spartans, including the shield of Brasidas. Meanwhile, the 420 Spartans on Sphacteria were trapped, and Sparta was completely helpless to rescue them. With 420 of their men trapped on Sphacteria, Sparta needed to reevaluate their position. The Spartans on the island were essentially the Athenians' hostages, and Sparta could not move to rescue or resupply them without putting their lives in danger. In an effort to save the trapped soldiers, the Spartan leadership negotiated an immediate truce with the Athenian strategists. Sparta agreed to hold back its fleet and halt their attacks on Pylos. And in return, the Athenians permitted them to send supplies to their men. In the meantime, Sparta sent ambassadors to Athens to try and negotiate a better deal. The hasty truce greatly humiliated Sparta, as they were forced to recognize just how helpless their infantry was in the face of an Athenian fleet. To bargain for the safety of their men, Sparta sent ambassadors to Athens to propose a cessation of hostilities. The ambassadors tried to emphasize that their situation was not a result of strategic incompetence or lack of strength, but rather plain bad luck. According to them, the Spartans on Sphacteria did not deserve to suffer further, because they were trapped through no fault of their own. These statements provoked the ire of Cleon, a popular Athenian politician known for his populist speeches. Cleon insisted that the terms of negotiations be discussed openly before the assembly and the Athenian people, instead of in private. The Spartan ambassadors were not as comfortable with public speaking as the Athenians, so they decided to leave. Following the failed attempts of the Spartan ambassadors, hostilities resumed. Back in Athens, Cleon took matters into his own hands. After being elected general, or strategos, he left to join the ongoing battle, accompanied by javelin-armed infantry and archers. With renewed strength and numbers, the Athenians landed on Sphacteria and engaged their enemy. The battle was hard fought, but they eventually managed to surround the remaining Spartans. It was then that Cleon invited the Spartans to surrender, as he hoped to return to Athens with prisoners. The Spartans were exhausted after spending 72 days on the island, so they accepted Cleon's offer and laid down their arms. A Spartan capitulation had previously been unheard of, and the news of their surrender echoed throughout Greece like thunder. The Spartans' capitulation completely changed the course of the Peloponnesian War. Athens used their new prisoners of war as leverage and threatened to execute them if Sparta ever returned to pillage their lands. This gave the Athenians the freedom to conduct their own raids, which were aided further by their eventual seizing of the island of Kythera. Sparta tried to negotiate for peace, but were unsuccessful. Cleon, meanwhile, was emboldened by his victory and continued to gain popularity with the Athenian people. Popularity that translated to power.
I hope you enjoyed learning about the battles of Pylos and Sphacteria. The battles were hard fought by both sides, but Athens' victory gave them an enormous boost in morale. It encouraged them to be more aggressive, and it was some time before Sparta recovered from the aftershocks of their historic surrender. Now, is there anything else you'd like to do? I'm happy to oblige. Let's begin. Where were Demosthenes and his fleet forced to land during a storm? Demosthenes landed close to the island, but not directly on it. Try again. Yes, Demosthenes landed at Pylos, where he was inspired to set up an outpost. On to the second question. Which famous Athenian argued with the peace-seeking Spartan ambassadors? Correct. Cleon demanded the terms of the peace be discussed in front of the Athenian assembly, which greatly dissuaded the ambassadors. One last question. Which Spartan general rammed Pylos with his ship? Agis was the Spartan king who gathered his forces after hearing of the Athenian presence on Pylos. Try another answer. Leonidas was a Spartan king who died 55 years before the Battle of Pylos. Try again. Correct. Brasidas ordered his ship to ram the rocks and lost his shield in the process. You've passed the test. Well done, traveler. Then I will say farewell. Though I hope our paths will cross again someday.
Welcome to Laconia, visitor. You're here to learn about Spartan society, yes? Then I won't stop you. Sparta is a glorious place, and you should feel honored to be here. Honored, and perhaps somewhat frightened. Sparta had a unique hierarchy, especially compared to the rest of Greece. Everyone had their place, and you will soon learn what those places were. I will find you again once your visit has ended. Until then, visitor.
Spartan society was structured around austerity, self-sufficiency, and a hostility towards foreign elements. It was divided into three social classes: citizens, perioikoi, and helots. Citizens were called Spartans, or homoioi. They were free men and women with mostly equal rights and wealth, though their contributions to political life were extremely limited. The perioikoi lived in surrounding areas under Spartan control. They cultivated the land and were primarily merchants and craftsmen. They were also part of the army, and their lands were the first line of defense in the event of a hostile attack. Helots were Sparta's lowest class. They were people who had lost their freedom to the Spartans, and they served the city as slaves. Helots were considered property instead of people. As a result, they had no political or civil rights. Helots made up the majority of Sparta's population. According to Polydeuces, they lingered between slavery and freedom. Two elements made Helots differ from other slaves. They were allowed to form their own families, and they were publicly owned by the city of Sparta instead of private citizens. Because Helots were deemed public property, they could not be sold as merchandise. They mostly worked to cultivate the land, but also fought in wars alongside the Spartans. While they gave the fruits of their labor to Sparta, they also kept a fair part of it for themselves. This practice allowed some Helots to make enough money to buy their own freedom. Alternatively, if a Helot served the state well enough in military campaigns, they could also be granted civil rights.
Πίσω να αρκαθεύδω.
The founding of Sparta is dated around the 9th century BCE. Historical information about the city is limited, but it was known to extend into the region of Laconia. Over time, Sparta started encroaching on the territory of Messenia, eventually leading to war. Sparta gained more land in this conflict, which they divided between their citizens and the perioikoi. The aftermath of the Second Messenian War, from 640 to 620 BCE, then divided the population into three groups: the Homoioi, the Perioikoi, and the Helots. The Helots of Laconia mostly respected Sparta's rule and did not cause much trouble. However, Helots from Messenia supposedly resisted the Spartans, although sources can only confirm one revolt for certain, which occurred in Messenia in 464 BCE. During the 5th century BCE, Helots were quite active in the army, especially during the Peloponnesian War. They served as hoplites on land and as rowers during naval battles. In both cases, they gave Sparta an important numerical advantage. For every Spartan on the battlefield, there were at least 7 Helots. Although many ancient sources say Spartans had a hostile relationship with Helots, they were much more likely to treat them better in times of war. For example, when 300 Helots and 120 elite Spartans were captured by Athens during the Battle of Sphacteria in 425 BCE, the Spartans promised the Helots their freedom if they served them well in combat. Similarly, around the same time, the Spartan general Brasidas fought a battle alongside 700 Helots. Impressed by their courage and loyalty, Brasidas later freed them all and allowed them to join the Perioikoi. Perioikoi were another group of Sparta's population. They lived not in the city itself, but in its surrounding areas. The Perioikoi were never hostile against the Spartans. In fact, both groups together were known by the collective name Lacedaemonians. Perioikic cities had their own autonomy and sanctuaries, but they were always bound to Sparta. They were allowed to develop their own local laws and economies, but could never reach a level of prosperity that rivaled their parent state.
I see you've finished. I hope you have a better appreciation for Spartan society. Nothing we do is without reason, and every man, woman, and child has a role to play. What would you like to do? Is that so? Then let us begin. During which battle were Helots promised their freedom? It was Athens who fought the Persians at Marathon, not Sparta. Try again. Yes. In the Battle of Sphacteria, a group of elite Spartans promised to free their accompanying Helots if they helped the Spartans during a siege. Next question. Which of the following is another name for Spartan citizens? Spartan citizens were also called Omi, which meant equals. One final question. Which Spartan general freed 700 Helots? True, Pausanias was a Spartan general, but there is no record of him freeing 700 Helots. Try another answer. Correct. Brasidas freed 700 Helots as a reward for their exemplary military service. You passed. I'm impressed. Of course. Follow me. Greetings, visitor. You stand in Sparta's political center, where all of the city's most important decisions were made. You should feel honored. Spartans may be unequaled on the battlefield, but some situations are better solved By a meeting of minds, then a clash of swords. Not many, mind you, but some. Sparta's political system was unique in the Greek world. While Athenians wasted hours on end whining and wagging their tongues at each other, Spartan kings made their decisions swiftly and deliberately. They preferred action over words. Come find me again when you finish your visit. We will speak more then. Farewell.
Sparta's political system differed from most of Greece's. One of its most distinctive features was that it was ruled by two kings. These kings belonged to two separate dynasties, the Eurypontids and the Aegeads, both of which were said to be descended from Heracles. Both kings shared equal powers, and disputes between them required the intervention of special magistrates known as ephors. However, if one of the kings were more charismatic or experienced, they could influence the weaker king's choices. Spartan kings had several responsibilities and functions. As lifetime magistrates, they were technically Sparta's priests and strategists, and their duties encompassed everything from politics to justice. Originally, both kings would lead military campaigns in times of war. However, from 507 BCE onwards, only one of the two kings could be head of the army. On the battlefield, kings were accompanied by 300 elite soldiers for protection. But being a king wasn't only about working and fighting. They enjoyed special privileges as well. Spartan kings lived at the expense of the city, owned royal estates in the surrounding Perioikic cities, and received the majority of the spoils of war. When they passed away, they were buried with special honors, and the population mourned them for a period of 10 days.
Free to see. Απέθανον αν ή ουκ ήσαν ολολότες.
The kings of Sparta enjoyed many important religious honors. They were in charge of sacrifices, both during military campaigns and at home. The kings received double portions of the meat at all communal meals, and they were also the first to pour libations. They also personally conducted public sacrifices as priests, which helped remind their subjects of their divine connection to Heracles and Zeus. The ephors, or overseers, were 5 magistrates elected by the Spartan assembly. They were chosen from amongst Spartan citizens over 30 and served for 1 year with no possibility of re-election. The ephors played a large part in administrating the city and were considered the most democratic agents in the Spartan political system. They had judicial power and ordered the dispatching of the Spartan army during wars. They also met and negotiated with representatives from other states, in addition to running the Agoge, the Spartan education system. While not as powerful as the two kings, the ephors still held great sway over Sparta's affairs. The Gerousia was the Spartan Council of Elders. It was made up of the 2 current kings, as well as 28 elders called Gerontes. They were Spartan citizens over the age of 60, the cutoff age for military duty. They were elected for life by the Spartan Assembly. The Gerousia, similar to Athens' Boulé, handled legislative and financial matters. It could submit bills and motions to the Assembly, and could also cancel Assembly decisions with the power of veto. To ensure that the right of veto did not weaken the Assembly, ephors were introduced to keep the Gerousia in check and maintain a steady balance of power. This allowed Sparta to include more just elements in its political system. The Spartan Assembly, or the Apella, was made up of Spartan citizens who were over 30 years old. Its exact meeting place remains unknown, but it was presided over by a special member of the Ephors called the eponymous Ephor. The Apella had limited authority, since any decision it made could be overruled by the Gerousia. But thanks to the efforts of the Ephors, it still played an important role in Spartan society. The Apella dealt with topics like foreign affairs, war declarations, peace negotiations, and more. They also elected Ephors and Gerousia members, and could both grant political rights to foreigners and remove them from Spartan citizens. Unlike the myriad sources on the functions of the Athenian Assembly, the exact details of the Apella's decision-making process are unknown.
I see you finished. I hope you feel more knowledgeable about the inner workings of Spartan politics. Our way of ruling was not conventional, to say the least. But it served our purposes well. What would you like to do? Argue. We shall see. Let's begin. What was the name of the Spartan Assembly? Correct. The Spartan Assembly was known as the Apella. Question 2. How many members did the Gerousia have? No. Try again. There were 28 Gerontes on the Council of Elders, but they weren't the only members of the Gerousia. Keep trying. No. Although we Spartans did love that number. Try a different answer. Yes, the Gerousia consisted of 28 Gerontes and the 2 kings of Sparta. Last question. What was the name of the Spartan education program? The Agora was the central meeting place of many Greek cities. Keep trying. Correct. Our rigorous education program was called the Agogi, and it was overseen by the Air Force. You've done well, Visitor. Very well. As you wish. Come with me.
Welcome, Wanderer, to the democratic center of Athens, otherwise known as the Pnyx. The battles fought here may be more intellectual than bloody, but they are no less spectacular. These outcomes will affect an entire city in a different way. The Pnyx was the meeting place of the Athenian Assembly and the physical embodiment of democracy at work. This tour will give you insight into how citizens made decisions and kept the city running. We can talk more when you have finished the tour. See you soon, Wanderer.
The Athenian Assembly was known as the Ecclesia. It met at the Pnyx 40 times a year to discuss various civic matters, and each session usually lasted a few hours. The word Pnyx is believed to mean something close to packed together. This was probably a reference to the fact that during meetings of the Ecclesia, the location would be filled to its capacity, with citizens packed in practically shoulder to shoulder. All male citizens were allowed to directly participate in the democratic process. Those over 20 years old had the right to speak and vote, while those over 30 could be elected to the higher position of magistrate. In total, There were approximately 30,000 citizens in Athens in the classical period. To draft and adopt decrees, 6,000 of them had to attend the meeting. Citizens came from all over Attica's 10 districts to attend the meetings of the Ecclesia. The meeting was presided over by an executive council called the Prytanes. Every session began with a sacrifice to Zeus Agoreos, the patron of the assembly. During the meeting, citizens delivered speeches from the Pnyx's platform on whatever issues the city faced. Afterwards, the issue was voted on with a show of hands from the gathered assembly. The Ecclesia made important decisions about subjects like grain importation, expenses, and declarations of war. While they could not directly enact laws, they had a say in appointing Athens' legislators, which gave them a large role in shaping the city's daily operations. While some citizens only participated in the sessions of the Ecclesia, others could become more involved in democracy as magistrates. Magistrates were elected from among Athenian citizens over 30. They were often successful orators and charismatic politicians, and they held much more sway over important decisions than the average citizen. One of the most famous magistrates was Pericles, who was so popular he held his position for 15 years. In theory, every Athenian citizen over the age of 20 had the right to participate in the assembly. However, some of them lived far from the city, and others could not financially afford to miss a day of work to attend meetings. For these reasons, the city introduced a special allowance called a misthos ecclesiastikos in the 4th century BCE, meant to encourage participation. Originally, it was 2 obols, but the politician Cleon raised it to 3. Athens introduced several innovations that heavily influenced modern society, including theater, architecture, and philosophy. However, their greatest contribution was their democratic government, which introduced the concept of a city ruled by its citizens. The decision to adopt democracy as a government, a choice made in 508 BCE, shaped civilization as we know it, and continues to affect us today.
Hello again, Wanderer. I trust you appreciated learning about the inner workings of the city. Is there anything else you'd like to do? Then let's start with a simple question. Approximately how many citizens were in Athens in my time? That's too low a number for this big city. Try again. What? There aren't that many people living in the entire world, let alone in the city of Athens. Try a different answer. Yes, there were approximately 30,000 citizens in Athens, although the population as a whole was much larger. On to the second question. Who of the following was a famous Athenian magistrate? Leonidas was a Spartan warrior king. Try again. Perseus was a legendary hero, but he was never an Athenian magistrate. Try another answer. Plato was brilliant and eloquent, but he was a philosopher, not a magistrate. Keep trying. Yes, Pericles was an extremely popular magistrate who managed to keep his position for 15 years. Only one question left. What does the word Pnyx mean? People may have met at the Pnyx, but its name did not mean meeting place. Try again. Correct. the Pnyx was usually crowded with citizens attending meetings of the Ecclesia. You know enough about democracy to be a politician yourself. Well done, Wanderer. It will be my pleasure to take you to your next destination. Follow me. Welcome to the Gymnasium of the Kinosaries, one of the many places where philosophers came to enrich the mind and enlighten the spirit. There is no better setting for learning than in a quiet place far away from the commotion of the city. Education held a very important place in Greek society. The most prominent educators were philosophers, whose teachings ranged from everyday rituals to the makeup of the universe. Once your tour is complete, come find me, and we can discuss what you've learned. Farewell for now, Wanderer.
Philosophy comes from the Greek word philosophia, or love of wisdom. This concept was in direct contrast with philochromatia, love of money, and philotimia, love of honor. As of the second half of the 5th century BCE, Athens was known as Greece's capital of philosophy. Due to the rise of democracy, there was an increasing need for education beyond the basic subjects of elementary school. Athenian citizens needed to be able to participate in various functions of the democratic state, such as being elected for office, proposing new laws, engaging in military decisions, or simply defending their rights. Originally, Athens had no official school buildings for higher education. Sophists and philosophers taught either in private homes or in public spaces like the theater. To recruit young pupils for long-term curricula, they also held classes in gymnasia, where young Athenians underwent physical training. The Cynosarges was a sanctuary to Heracles, located in the south suburb of Athens. At the beginning of the 4th century BCE, Antisthenes used this sanctuary as a teaching spot for his school of philosophy, the aptly named Cynicism. Any free citizen was allowed to involve themselves in the Athenian democratic process. However, to truly influence the flow of politics, their speech and rhetoric skills had to be impeccable. As a result, many sophists taught subjects like logic, reason, and eloquence. These were meant to help students achieve arete, or excellence. But this specific concept of excellence was often challenged, especially by other philosophers. For example, Plato, Socrates, and Isocrates preferred a more moral approach and argued that rhetoric should be used as a means to serve the greater good. Socrates and Plato went even further, declaring that philosophy and wisdom were not only useful tools, but also ethical virtues. Ancient Greek philosophy was multidisciplinary in nature. In addition to wisdom and logic, philosophers also studied and taught math, geometry, music theory, and even medicine. For example, the philosopher Prodicus wrote a treatise called On Human Nature, where he outlined various explanations on human physiology. Philosophy's influence was also great enough to affect medicine. Hippocratic physicians were known to incorporate philosophical ideas into their work, and the treatise On Airs seems to be influenced by pre-Socratic theories on air being the first principle of the universe. The famed philosopher Socrates had an ambiguous relationship with sophists. In Plato's dialogues, Socrates is portrayed as being in constant opposition with the famous sophists of his time. Aristophanes' comedy, The Clouds, meanwhile, depicts Socrates as a sophist himself, constantly demanding payment for his teachings. Socrates was in fact very poor and made no money off his teachings. He also differed from the sophists in that while they only taught aristocratic youths, Socrates taught everyone, regardless of station. Unfortunately, his controversial ideas and practices did not sit well with the city of Athens, and he was eventually tried for impiety. Philosophy was not only a collection of ideas, but a way of life. According to philosopher Pierre Hadot, his ancient counterparts had a daily regime of spiritual exercises to combat their passions, doubts, and illusory beliefs. These exercises included meditation on death, contemplation of nature, or speaking with a friend or mentor. Philosophers also followed specific dress codes and diets. They were also part of a community of masters and students. These communities were created and strengthened in schools. Plato founded such a school in the early 4th century BCE, when he purchased a property in a grove just outside of Athens. The school was designed to groom students into philosopher citizens who could eventually rule the city in a measured and fair manner. It followed its own rules and was open to both male and female disciples.
I can tell by the crease in your brow that you're already puzzling over the new things you've learned. Don't be embarrassed. Even the wisest among us need to ask questions before they search for answers. Is there anything else you'd like to do? You wish to test your wisdom? Very well. Let's see how you compare to the great philosophers. The first question is an easy one. What does philosophia mean? There was a word for the love of money, but it was philochrimatia, not philosophia. Try a different answer. Philothymia was the love of honor. Try again. Correct. Philosophia referred to the love of wisdom. Time for the next question. The Kynosarges was a sanctuary dedicated to which Greek hero? Correct. It was the mighty Heracles. Now, for the last question. Which play by Aristophanes portrayed Socrates as a sophist? Yes, The Clouds was a comedy that portrayed the famous philosopher as a greedy sophist. Plato even believed that this caricature contributed to his mentor's eventual trial and execution. Well done, wanderer. Even Socrates would be impressed by the depths of your wisdom. Very well, I'll take you there. Follow me.
Greetings, my friend. Welcome to Arcadia, home of shepherds, sheep, and manure. I recently made an offer to buy some nearby farmland. Unfortunately, the owner refused, based on completely unsubstantiated rumors that I once burned down 3 farms in Kos. Can you believe it? I've never burned down a farm in my life. I may have once paid someone else to do so, but I assure you, my reasons were entirely acceptable and in the best interest of everyone involved. Arcadia was well known for its sublime natural vistas. Farmers and shepherds were seduced by its beauty, and it's easy to see why. I have to leave for now, but I'll meet you again when you finish your visit. Until then, my friend!
Grain was a staple of the Greek diet, to the point where Homer referred to his compatriots as mortal eaters of bread. Grain farming was a meticulous process. Due to dry summers, artificial irrigation was impossible, so farmers had to rely on rainfall to water their crops. This gave them very narrow windows for sowing and harvesting. On a farm of this size, only half of the field would be planted every year, while the other half would lie fallow to avoid exhausting the soil. According to the poet Hesiod, the best time to sow grain was in autumn, and the best time to harvest it was in May. Fortunately, if farmers missed their opportunity, they also had a chance to plant millet in the spring. Before planting in a field, the land needed to be plowed a total of 3 times. Once in the spring to remove weeds, again in the summer to aerate the soil, and a final time in the winter to plant the seeds in the moist earth. The plough was pulled by 2 oxen, while the sowing of seeds was done by hand. After the seeds were planted, a boy turned the soil with a hoe to protect them from hungry birds. Once the sowing was finished, the farmers waited for winter rains to irrigate the field. They also prayed to the goddess of agriculture, Demeter, and her daughter Persephone, in the hopes of being favored with a bountiful harvest come springtime. Grain was harvested in the spring using a curved knife called a sickle. With their backs to the wind, the reapers cut the plant stalks and left the sheaves behind before moving through the rest of the crop. Once the harvest was mowed, the sheaves were brought to the threshing floor. Animal husbandry was an important part of Greek agriculture. Farmers usually kept cattle, donkeys, sheep, goats, pigs, dogs, geese, and chickens. The animals mostly fed in pastures, but could also eat some of the farm's harvested grain, as well as damaged fruit and residue from olive oil and wine production. Livestock had several purposes. Their manure was used to fertilize the fields, and their grazing helped remove weeds. Arcadia was a mountainous region believed to be the home of the god Pan, so farmers were more likely to keep sheep and goats than cattle. Most farming tools were simple handmade implements made of wood and occasionally tipped with iron. The most complicated tool was the plough, which was made up of several parts, including a beam, a drawbar, and a yoke. A 2-pronged hoe, meanwhile, was used for tilling soil, and farmers also had tools for digging and weeding. After the sheaves were harvested, workers brought them to the threshing floor to extract the grain. Oxen or donkeys were hitched to a post in the center of the floor and guided around it, while workers threw sheaves under their hooves. The animals, stomping, forced the grain kernels out of their casings. Afterwards, the kernels were collected for the winnowing process. Winnowing helped separate the heavier grain seeds from the chaff. It began with using a wooden shovel to toss the grain. While in the air, the wind blew away the lighter chaff, leaving only the heavier grain. To remove the remaining chaff, the grain was tossed in a wooden basket called a lignon, which filtered the grain until only clean kernels remained. Barley, which was used to make flour, was different from other types of grain. Threshing was not enough to separate the barley from its husk, so instead, it was roasted in a specialized tool called a frigatron. After the barley was roasted, it was pounded with a mortar and pestle. The pounded grain was then ground into a meal using either a hand mill or a hopper mill. Grinding was boring work, so workers often lightened the mood with a mill song. Once the barley was completely ground, it was sieved using a wicker basket called a koskinon, making it ready for use. Grain storage areas needed to be dark, dry, cool, contained, and well ventilated to prevent the grain from spoiling. According to Hesiod, the preferred method of storing grain was in a pithos, the same container as Pandora's mythological box. Archaeological evidence suggests that Greeks may have also stored grain in small, walled structures woven from branches. Farms generally needed to store enough grain to sustain themselves for the year and seed corn for the next. Any surplus was either stored for a lean year or sold to markets for profit.
My friend! Good to see you again! You must feel hungry. I know I would, spending all that time watching farmers working themselves to the bone. Now, what else can I do for you? If you say so, let's get started. According to Hesiodos, what was the best month to start harvesting grain? Fall was the preferred time to plant the seeds, not to harvest the grain. Keep trying. Close, but a little bit too early. Try again. January was far too wet for grain harvesting. Try another answer. Yes, spring was the ideal time for harvesting. Guess I'm not the only smart one around here. Time for another question. Which tool did reapers use to cut stalks? Yes, a sickle was a curved knife, making it ideal for harvesting sheaves of grain. Only one question left. Arcadia was believed to be the home of which god? Athena was the patron of Athens. She didn't even live in Arcadia. Try again. Correct. Pan supposedly called the mountainous region his home. Incredible work, my friend. It's safe to say your mind is definitely more wheat than chaff. Safe travels, my friend. We'd better be seeing each other again soon.
Hello, Wanderer. May I introduce you to the Keramikos, the kiln that warms all of Athens' pottery. The art produced here is some of the most beautiful in the Greek world. I envy the potter's skills, though I'm not quite as envious of their clay-stained hands. It's bad for the nails. The Keramikos was a special neighborhood in Athens, where potters created vases and containers that stood all over Greece. This tour will take you through the elaborate process needed to turn something as simple as muddy clay into ornate perfume vases and gilded wine cups. Come find me when you complete your visit, and we can talk more about what you've learned.
The Keramikos was a large, sprawling area northwest of Athens' Acropolis. While part of it was used as a graveyard, it was also dedicated to the creation of pottery. The Kerameikos was so significant to the art form that its name lives on in the word ceramics. Perhaps drawn by the river, potters moved into the area and formed their own bustling community. It's believed that by the end of the 5th century BCE, hundreds of thousands of pottery vessels had been made in Athens, including everything from heavy, undecorated cooking pots to delicate and beautiful containers reserved for the most precious oils. Sadly, only around 1% of these works survive today, some only in small fragments. Raw clay from a river was hardly fit for a potter's wheel. Athenian potters used clay that was rich in iron, which created the distinctive orange-red coloring seen in Athenian pottery. But this high-quality clay needed to be handled carefully to avoid disasters in the kiln later on. The clay was first brought to settling beds, where it was mixed with water to wash out any organic debris like leaves. Once it was purified, workers kneaded the clay with their hands to push out air bubbles and create the texture necessary for a flawless finish. One of the goals of these early steps was to remove any impurities that could destroy a delicate design, or worse, render a vase unusable. Once the clay was cleaned, it was up to the potter to shape it into a vase by spinning it on a wheel or pressing it into a mold. Their choice depended on what shape they wanted for the vase, but they also considered the possible scope of its decoration. Potters did not work alone. A workshop might have had many people working together on different aspects of production. Potters collaborated with many different painters for decorating their creations. Some of these painters even became potters themselves. All in all, a single vase could be worked on by many different artists, with each one focusing on a different aspect of its design. After the pots were shaped and decorated, they were packed into kilns for the lengthy and delicate firing process. The process had 3 stages: oxidation, reduction, and reoxidation. The main purpose of the firing process was to carefully manage the clay's exposure to oxygen. The chemical reactions caused by firing gave the pots their distinctive orange-red coloring. This also turned the designs made from the clay decoration slips glossy and black. The most difficult part of the firing process was managing the fires themselves. It required an enormous amount of skill and experience to properly judge the exact temperatures needed, and even the smallest mistake could ruin several hours of work. Vases could be decorated in all sorts of ways. Before 530 BCE, Athenian vases were decorated using the black figure technique, where figures and designs were painted as dark silhouettes. At the end of the 6th century BCE, painters created a new technique called red figure, an inversion of the painting process that left the figures in red and the background in black. This gave the artist more freedom to better explore details like muscles and individual locks of hair. Designs were sketched onto the bare surface of the pot using a thin, sharp tool. Thin relief lines, which helped define subtle elements like facial features, were added using a brush made of a few stiff hairs. More elaborate vases were sometimes gilded, but these decorations were so delicate, they were most likely only added after the firing process.
You've returned! As you can see, pottery was an arduous and delicate process, but was exemplary of the skill and craftsmanship that dominated Greek art and culture. Now, is there something else you'd like to do? Then let's get right to it, starting with an easy question. What was responsible for the orange-red color of most Athenian vases? Paint was not the main source of the vase's distinctive coloring. Try again. Organic debris like leaves were actually filtered out of the clay early on in the process. Keep trying. Thankfully, potters never resorted to such barbarism to color their work. At least, I hope not. Correct! Athenian potters worked with clay that was rich with iron, and that iron created a distinctive orange-red coloring. On to the next question. What were the chambers for firing pottery called? Correct. Pottery was fired in kilns, and the firing process was extremely precise and delicate in nature. You're almost done. Just one more question. The firing process was made up of how many stages? No, it was much too complicated to be relegated to one stage. Try again. Correct. The 3 stages of the firing process were oxidation, reduction, and re-oxidation. You know your pottery. Well done, Wanderer. It would be my pleasure. Follow me. Greetings, Wanderer, and welcome to the port of Piraeus. Piraeus is one of the busiest, most important ports in the Greek world. Money flows through here like a river that runs all the way to Athens. Acting as a port for Athens, Piraeus welcomed merchants, goods, and travelers from all over the world. It was a central part of Athens' economy, but it was also fortified enough to protect the city's considerable fleet. When you finish exploring the port, find me, and we will talk further.
Piraeus, a peninsula southwest of Athens, became the city's main port after the politician Themistocles encouraged the development of its natural harbors. These developments led to the gradual abandonment of the older harbor of Phaleron. Piraeus's fortifications were further developed by Cimon and Pericles, along with the long walls which ensured goods could still be moved during sieges. Piraeus was divided into 3 main sectors: the military port, the emporion, and the residential area. By the 5th century BCE, it had become not only Athens' naval headquarters, but also the mercantile center of the Mediterranean. Piraeus' development during the 5th century BCE attracted a large population. Many craftsmen, merchants, bankers, sailors, and ship owners moved to the port in great numbers. The population was a mix of Greek citizens, foreign visitors, and immigrants, known as metics. The variety of the port's inhabitants gave Piraeus a cosmopolitan atmosphere. Most of the residents were involved in trade, but others worked on shipbuilding or in larger-scale industries like shield factories. Piraeus's commercial focus offered many opportunities for those seeking to increase their wealth and status. One such rags-to-riches tale is that of Passion, a slave who eventually became a citizen and earned a fortune thanks to his bank and his shield factory. Piraeus was a demi, or district, of Attica. Because of its size, function, and varied population, it had a much more complicated administrative structure than other demes. Above all, Piraeus was closely monitored and controlled by the Athenian Assembly due to its importance to the city. Within the port, there were two separate categories of trade: international trade, which took place in the Emporion, and retail trade, which was managed by Kapoloi in Piraeus's Agora.
Μεγάλη είναι το όνομα δι, βοήθη των άθλιων επέτειναν τη γέα ταύτη, γύρνο ελεήμων, το ικτρό στη ουδέποτε κακό να πειράσει. Επί των ημερών.
The Emporion was a commercial port dedicated to trading goods from overseas. All international transactions were required to be made within its limits and needed to be exclusively wholesale. Elected magistrates managed all business and laws in the port. Meanwhile, port authorities known as epimeletes oversaw trade and took care of the regulation of prices. This was an especially crucial duty, as the amount of supplies and goods could fluctuate wildly based on factors like bad harvests or lost cargo. Common products sold in the Emporion included vegetables, fruits, fish, leather, timber, marble, metal, weapons, and ceramics. According to Hermippos, Athens was also wealthy enough to afford the finest goods from all over the world, including figs from Rhodes, almonds from Thassos, oil from Samos, and wine from Chios. Taxes were collected on all merchandise that came into the Emporion, which provided Athens with a major source of income. After arriving in the Emporion, merchants set up samples of their goods in a display area called the Deigma. This was where citizens and foreigners gathered to officially make their deals, and almost all merchandise that came into the Emporion was traded within the area. The Deigma was under constant supervision by magistrates, who negotiated price control with the importers. They would occasionally give special privileges to those who agreed to sell at lower prices. These privileges ranged from tax exemptions to specially reserved seating in the theater. Piraeus was a deme, and as such was supervised by a magistrate called the Demarchos. While most demarchoi were chosen locally within their deme, Piraeus was appointed directly by Athens, so the city could better monitor its commercial interests. In fact, matters regarding the Emporion, the military harbor, and the grain trade were regularly debated and decided by the Athenian Assembly. Transactions within the Piraeus were supervised by metronomoi. These were magistrates responsible for keeping track of weights and measures. They made sure merchants' measurements were always accurate to prevent bad deals and scams. Even though Piraeus would eventually develop into a city in its own right, it always remained under the control of Athens. A commercial tax of 2%, or a pentecost, was placed on all cargo entering and leaving Piraeus. The tax was collected by a group of 5 people called Pentecostologoi. According to Andocides, This position could be bought for the hefty sum of 30 talents, or 180,000 drachmae. However, most of these officials made a profit of up to 6 talents, making the job very lucrative. While merchants were responsible for setting the value of their goods, Pentecostalogoi had the power to challenge the value, if they saw fit. Furthermore, merchants were required to register with these officials before they could transport, display, and sell their goods. Overall, this system provided Piraeus, and by extension Athens, with a tremendous amount of money. The sale of grain was overseen by special magistrates called sitophilakes. Since some Greek cities had a grain deficiency and relied heavily on imports, these officials were extremely important. Their duties encompassed all aspects of grain commerce, including price control and profit margins, to ensure Athens remained well-fed. This is no surprise. Grain was so important to Athens that 2/3 of all stocks were required to be transported and sold at the city's agora by law. According to Demosthenes, the significance of the sitophilakes was such that if they failed in their duties, they faced the death penalty. The Emporion operated on a foundation of credit and loans. Overseas commerce was handled by 2 types of tradespeople. Emporoi transported cargo in borrowed ships, while Nauchloroi were ship owners who moved goods on their own vessels. Elsewhere in the Emporion were bankers and accountants who arranged loans and kept track of incoming and outgoing ships. Emporoi and Nauchloroi financed their maritime voyages with these loans, which often had a high interest rate due to the dangers of sea travel. Emporoi used the loans to pay for both the cargo and the right to a ship, while Nauchloroi only had to pay for their crew. Loans and interest were repaid upon a ship's return to port. However, in the event of a catastrophe such as a shipwreck, the merchant and ship owner were released from their obligations, and the losses were transferred to the lender.
You've returned. I hope you enjoyed your stroll through the port. Piraeus was important to Athens' commercial interests, but it eventually came into its own as a vibrant and bustling port. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. If you say so, let us see what you've learned, Wanderer. First, a simple question. Which Athenian politician originally encouraged the development of Piraeus' natural harbors? Pericles did contribute to the port's development, but he was building off someone else's ideas. Try again. By the time Alcibiades was born, Piraeus was already a thriving port. Keep trying. Correct. Themistocles saw Piraeus' potential as a port and encouraged its development. On to the next question. What did the sitophilakes supervise? It was metronomi who were in charge of Piraeus' weights and measures. Try again. Yes, sitophilakes had the extremely important responsibility of handling all matters related to grain commerce. Only one question left. What was the name of the slave who took advantage of Piraeus' opportunities to earn themselves citizenship? Correct! Passion managed to earn a fortune and achieve citizenship thanks to both his bank and a successful shield business. Your knowledge of Piraeus is impressive. Well done, Wanderer. Of course! Follow me, Wanderer.
Welcome, traveler, to the Sanctuary of Asclepios, a place of rest and healing. The Sanctuary of Asclepios is an amazing place, even for those with only a passing interest in medicine. It was a fascinating location, combining the mystical, religious, and scientific. And if someone happened to pass out, they'd luckily be surrounded by skilled physicians. This is the Sanctuary of Asclepios, the god of medicine. It was here that the sick and weary came, seeking cures for their ailments. Sometimes the medical practitioners provided the cures, and sometimes the healing came from the gods themselves. This tour will help explain the inner workings of the sanctuary, as well as the unique way the Greeks approached medicine. I hope you enjoy yourself. I'll be waiting for you at the end of your visit.
The ill and infirm came to this sanctuary to pray and offer sacrifices to Asclepios, the god of medicine. According to myth, Asclepios was once a mortal physician who eventually became a god. He had many sanctuaries across Greece, but the most famous was in Epidaurus. When pilgrims passed through the entrance of the sanctuary, they could read this inscription: "When you enter the abode of the god which smells of incense, you must be pure, and thought is pure when you think with piety." Medical steles constituted a sort of hub between medicine, religion, and the divine. They were slabs with inscriptions that praised Asclepios' virtues and merit, and described his methods of healing. The inscriptions relayed the dreams patients had within the abaton, one of the most important buildings in the sanctuary. The steles outlined the patient's name, their disease, and how they were cured by Asclepios. They were probably written by the sanctuary's priests, or at least under the priest's supervision. Asclepios was a complex deity. In addition to being a god, he was also a trained physician and disciple of the centaur Chiron. In ancient Greece, religion was inseparable from rites, processions, and sacrifices. This was no different in Epidaurus, and visitors to Asclepios' sanctuary needed to prepare themselves accordingly. Pilgrims cleaned themselves in order to be pure, then offered Asclepios food like honey cakes, cheesecakes, baked meats, and figs. The food was placed on the sanctuary's holy table, where it was presumably later taken by priests. After the preliminary offerings, visitors were allowed to enter the abaton, where they would hopefully encounter Asclepios in a dream. Medical steles also mention that healed patients sometimes gave additional offerings to Asclepios as thanks for being cured. Asclepios was originally born a mortal, and was the product of an affair between the god Apollo and a mortal, Coronis. Apollo killed Coronis after discovering she had been unfaithful, and ordered her body burned on a funeral pyre. However, he rescued his unborn child from Coronis' womb before the fire consumed her body. Apollo gave the baby to the centaur Chiron, who raised Asclepios and taught him to practice medicine. Over time, Asclepios became so skilled in the art of healing, he could even raise the dead. This angered Zeus, who sent Asclepios to Hades with a thunderbolt. Apollo retaliated by killing the Cyclopes, responsible for making Zeus's thunderbolts. Then, Zeus revived Asclepios, making him immortal and deifying him in the process. In sculptures, pottery, mosaics, and coins, Asclepius was portrayed holding a staff intertwined with a sacred snake. The staff is a symbol of medicine that still endures to this day. The Epitateon was the priest's residence. As the link between patients and the gods, priests were essential to the operation of the sanctuary. They were often elected into the priesthood for one-year periods, but could also buy themselves a position if they were wealthy enough. In addition to interpreting patients' dreams in the Abaton, priests both supervised and performed sacrifices and rituals. During these functions, they were usually clad in white. The Abaton was built in the northern boundary of the sanctuary, where it surrounded a sacred well whose water was believed to have therapeutic properties. The Abaton was where pilgrims went for incubation, or dream rituals. Details of the incubation ritual have been described in unearthed medical steles. They were also noted in Aristophanes' play Plutus, which featured a more comedic view of the process. Incubation was the dream ritual pilgrims experienced in the Abaton. After completing the necessary preliminary rituals, pilgrims were allowed to enter the sacred building, where they lay prone. As they took in the smell of burning incense, the sanctuary's priests extinguished the oil lamps and asked them to sleep in silence. Once they were asleep, Asclepius would appear in their dreams and give his medical advice. The advice included diet and treatment recommendations, as well as requests for specific offerings or religious rituals. Upon waking up, priests interpreted the patient's dreams, unless a patient had been miraculously healed in their sleep. However, if a patient was completely beyond help, they were removed from the Abaton. This was to adhere to a ritual law that stated that no one could die or be born within the building.
I see you've completed the tour. I hope you enjoyed your time in the sanctuary. As you can see, gods and miracles were just as important to the healing process as medicine was. Now, what else would you like to do? Excellent. Here is your first question. Which mythical creatures made Zeus's thunderbolts? Harpies were winged bird-like women. They did not make Zeus's thunderbolts. Keep trying. Gorgons were monsters who petrified men. Unfortunately, they did not make thunderbolts. Try again. Sirens were more likely to shipwreck sailors than work for Zeus. Try another answer. Correct. Zeus's thunderbolts were crafted by Cyclops. On to the second question. What was the name of the building where incubation occurred? Yes. Pilgrims entered the Abaton to undergo a dream ritual in the hopes of curing their ailments. One final question for you. Who was Asclepius' father? Hippocrates was thought to be a descendant of Asclepius, not the god's father. Try a different answer. Aegea was related to Asclepius, but she was his daughter. Keep trying. Yes, Apollo was Asclepius' father. and his mother was a mortal named Coronis. You've proven you know the sanctuary inside and out. Well done. Very well. Follow me.
My friend, welcome to Kythera, where clothes are dyed and noses are assaulted by disgusting smells. I think it smells terrible, and I can't wait to get out of here. The colors are pretty, though. This little island was where dyers brought all the color to Greek fashion through an intensely stinky procedure. This tour will reveal the steps it took for workers to brew the dye. Try not to step in any mollusk guts as you enjoy your visit. I promise I'll meet you at the end of your tour. See you soon, my friend.
In Greece, fabric and clothing were colored using natural dyes from shellfish, insects, and plants. Skilled craftsmen across the Greek world extracted dyes from these sources and combined them with other substances to create a variety of colors. The dyeing process supposedly produced incredibly pungent smells, and ancient writers would often comment on the stink in their works. Murex is the generic name for 3 species of mollusks that reside in the Mediterranean. The substance they secrete was used by craftsmen to create the most expensive dyes in the ancient world, the most famous of which was Tyrian purple. Fishing techniques varied depending on the type of mollusk. In shallow waters, fishermen could simply dive and catch the mollusks, but they set traps if the water was too deep. Being carnivorous, murex were often lured using dead animal flesh as bait. It was imperative that the mollusks be captured alive, as they only secreted the precious purple liquid needed for dyes upon death. The purple liquid that made up most dyes came from a gland in the murex. To collect it, workers would either crack open the mollusk's shell with a knife, or if it was smaller, crush it with a stone. Each mollusk only produced a small amount of liquid, and thousands of them were needed to produce even a gram of the substance. Because of this, captured mollusks were usually kept alive in seawater immersed baskets until enough had accumulated to produce a satisfactory amount of dye. The mollusk glands were mixed with salt and left to decompose for 3 days. Afterwards, the resulting mash was placed in a vat, where it boiled until it was thickened and reduced to 1/16 of its original volume. The dyers stirred this mixture and removed any impurities. This process produced the foul odor so reviled by ancient writers. Dyers checked the hue of the purple liquid by dipping in raw wool. The hue could be changed by adjusting the temperature of the liquid and by soaking the wool for different periods of time, with longer soaking producing deeper shades. The wool was dyed once before spinning and again before weaving to ensure it maintained its color. While murex purple dyed wool easily, it did not adhere as well to other fabrics, such as linen. Most Greek garments were made from rectangular fabric that was rarely cut or sewn. They were normally folded around the body, with girdles, pins, and buttons. Dyeing served to give the garments a more unique style. Decorations were also widely used, and were either woven or painted on. They depicted things like animals, human figures, and mythological scenes. Textile manufacturing and trade was one of the most lucrative businesses in classical Athens. Textiles were made of either wool or linen, with wool being the most common. Women produced the garments worn in domestic life, although some men ran professional workshops that fulfilled the same need. Other textiles were made by slaves and laborers under the supervision of master weavers, fullers, and dyers. Clothes didn't just keep people warm. They were used as a way to communicate social identities, like gender, status, and ethnicity. These could be expressed through garments and accessories, but also jewelry, hairstyles, perfumes, and cosmetics. Wealthy Greeks usually had garments of the highest quality, and all their accessories were decorated with gold, silver, or gemstones. Parasols and fans were also an important part of elite fashion, and were usually carried by accompanying slaves. The most common Greek garments were the peplos, the chiton, and the hymation. The peplos, typically worn by women, was a body-length cloth. It was folded back on itself and worn draped over the body and pinned over the shoulders. The chiton was a long garment with sleeves. Ankle-length chitones were normally worn by women, while men wore shorter versions of the garment. A hymation was a mantle that was worn over both the chiton and the peplos. Outside of daily life, there were also specialized clothes worn only in exceptional situations like weddings and religious ceremonies.
Good to see you again, my friend. I bet your clothes feel heavier now that you know how many mollusks were killed to dye them. But let's change the subject, yes? What else can I do for you? Then let's get right into it, starting with this question. Which purple dye was the most famous? I'm not familiar with that specific shade. Sounds like something the Spartans would like. Try another answer. Yes, the purple created from murex secretions was one of the most expensive and well-known dyes in the world. Here's another question. How did workers check the dye's hue? No, looking at the dye was not enough. Try again. It would not have been a good idea to stick a finger into a stinking boiling mixture of mollusk secretions. Keep trying. No, unless they wanted burnt purple toes. Try another answer. Correct. Workers dipped wool into the mixture to gauge the exact hue of the dye. Almost done, my friend. Just one final question. Which body-length garment was typically worn by women? Pelops was the legendary founder of the Olympic Games. Keep trying. Correct. A peplos was a body-length cloth that a woman draped over her body and pinned around her shoulders. I had no idea you were so knowledgeable about fashion, but look at you. I should have known from what you're wearing. You've got it, my friend. Farewell for now.
Amazing. You have now completed all available guided tours. Congratulations on your achievement and dedication to knowledge. We hope you have enjoyed your explorations into the rich history of ancient Greece. Even though you've done all the tours, there's still plenty left to see. There are hundreds of world stations to explore, mountains to climb, seas to swim, and sunsets to watch. Remember that you're welcome to return to guided tours at any time and replay your favorite ones. On behalf of the Assassin's Creed team, thanks for playing the Discovery Tour, and we hope to see you again soon.
κατοπατρίσω ότι έτη πάβει να αποστεί.
Ίστιμοι λέγονται με αυτό.
Έδι πάβει να αποστείλουν τη σφαιρό.
Τώρα κλείσμα.
Ως φερός εργάζεστε εδώ. Οι χαρακτήρες εν τες τραγωδίες προαιρούνται του ύψους της διαμίας.
Έχουμε κατά μονοπόλιον λίθους παρείας ή εξορίξαντο της φρικτής εκ των κατόγειων.
ειρήνη, πολύολβων και κόρων υγείαν, έπιε πρόλβηση εν ώρες, γλαυκόφεδρες ήτεχνε, πολυλίστη βασίλεια, ο εολόμηθε.
Βαβέ, τούτους τους όνους μαστιγού, ακαταπαύστος μαστιγού.
Μεγαλώνει και
και τελετάρχα, Θεόν Πάτερ Ιδέ και Ιέ, σκυπτούσε, κούρε δημάτων, βοτριόκος με οδηγέ των κομμών, ελθέ μακαρ, μίστες υβρίων και χαρημένος εή. Επικαλούμεσαι, μάκαρ.
Κατά μονοπόλιο λίθους Μάρι. διαφθείρει τους νέους και ούτε καταμαλθακίζονται. Εκπλήσει, αποφέρει.
ανήκουν την αιστεία.
Έχουμε κατά μονοπόλιο.
Οικία μου κατεκάψω. Ευρέ!
Διαπέχεστε ποροτάφκης.
Διαμοίραζε βραχή με τα θύματος πολέμων. Απόλεσα τον οίκον την αιστεία. Η πειρατέα πεπειράτησαν αντραποδίζει. Πού κέχομαι οχυμός.
εγώ, έστε τούτο το δω.
Αντιβολώ, δώστη εις ενηθήματι. Μίαν εις με πληκτίζεστε της κυσίης σας όδους ή να εξασφαλίσω τροφή. Η μη πολίτης ως απόλεσε απαξάπαντα. Η μη υπόμνησης της τροχυλασίας την θεία βουλήσει. Της θεής προελέλητο με γεγονένε πτωχών παραδειγματισμού.
Όχι ίστιμη. Λέγονε με αυτό.
Είχε φόρο.
Ο οίκος ότι μάλλον εφάσια.
Δυσπετώ το βίο. Λέγω με αυτό. Ευρέτηνα ασχολίαν.
Ω ναι, ασχολίαν την αβεβαίως.
Έχω ευκολία και...
ασχολία μου, να, βεβαίως.
Πολιόνιμε, Πυρίπολε και Τελεκάνθρα, Θεόν Πάτρε, Δέκαιε, Σκυπτούσε, Κούρε Δημάτορ, Μοτριόφκος με οδηγέ των κομμών, Ελουθέ Μάκαρ, Μίστε Σιβρίων και χαϊμένος εή.
Τι αλλού ευρίσκεται η γνώση σε τη πάρεξ, ότι ο εκπέφρον ούτε πενέχει επικλαφημών και οδυρμών. Ο ρούσης διός περχύπελον ο εκπίπτης. Ετίεης ιός περ ευλευρέτικε. Έτεινες τη δόαση ευμετάβολον σχήμα. Κλαφμή και οδυρμή που καλούσαν την αγωνία μόνο.
και ο Κίον κινείται.
εξάδελφοι.
Αναβιβάσατε το δάνεισμα επί δεύτερον και εν μέρος εις επίπροτον και οκτωμέρων.
αληθώς τούτο συνέβη.